Good evening. Welcome once again to our midweek Lenten Bible study. We are continuing this look at 40 days of giving, focusing on the ELCA World Hunger Appeal and looking at ways in which we can address hunger within our own communities. We want to thank you for your ongoing support of our ministry with the Rudyard School District as we are collecting here healthy snacks for the students, and also for your consideration towards a special gift to the ELCA World Hunger Appeal. We'll begin our study once again this evening with a video by Ryan Cumming, who is the Education Director for the ELCA World Hunger Program.
So far in ELCA World Hunger's 40 Days of Lent, we've been talking about the question, what will it take to end hunger? We've looked at 3 responses so far: a broader sense of community, honesty, and justice. This week, we'll talk about a 4th tool: investment. Clearly, ending hunger will require the investment of resources like time and money. But the investment that will really move us closer to a world without hunger is much deeper. It's the investment of our very selves in the pursuit of the just future to which God is leading us. And perhaps no story in the Bible exemplifies that better than the story of the Exodus. The Exodus begins in Egypt, where God's people are enslaved and oppressed. God seeks out Moses to lead the people, lays low the unjust Pharaoh, and accompanies the people across the wilderness for generations, providing food, water, and safety along the way. But like all paths to real freedom, it's hard work. The people long for the promised land, long for a home, and at times lose faith in the God who keeps saying one more step. Even God appears at times frustrated with the people, as we see in this week's reading from the book of Numbers. Yet God continues to lead and provide, and the people keep trudging along. Why? Simply put, both God and the people are invested in a shared endeavor that neither can give up on. In the covenant that is inaugurated between them, they are both made vulnerable to each other. By leading them from Egypt, God has tied their futures together. God has a plan, and God has invested much to ensure that the people are part of it. This people, this nation, is God's future. The people, too, have given up everything to seek liberation. There's no going back to slavery, no matter how hard the wilderness gets. So often we tend to view the church's work to end hunger in light of the virtues of mercy and grace. Food, clothing, shelter, and donations are often seen as mercies showered on suffering people, or gifts given to neighbors in need. But the reality is that our responses to hunger go beyond a desire to meet immediate needs. Our response is nothing less than an investment in the future of a just world where all are fed. What difference might that make for the hunger ministries of our church to see the work we do together as an investment in this vision? In Washington, D.C., the beloved Community Incubator is based on the idea of investing in the people and in the Logan Circle neighborhood community. The project began with a listening campaign by Luther Place Memorial Church with support from ELCA World Hunger. In this campaign, residents of the community expressed their desire for cooperatives that would allow them to use their skills and talents to build wealth and income that would stay in the community. The first cooperative incubated by Luther Place was Dolce Hogar, a cooperative of women who provide cleaning services for homes and businesses. Together, the women learned how to run a business, how to pursue just employment, and how to develop their own skills as leaders. As one participant describes it, the vision of the cooperative is that all 8 of us are well paid and well trained, and that we get to invest money in our families and in our community. Projects like this offer a counter witness to the policies and practices of disinvestment that have created communities with high rates of poverty and food insecurity across the United States. Despite decades of disinvestment, the residents of Logan Circle know that their community is worth the investment, and a better future is worth pursuing. We know this too by faith. Every community is blessed by God with assets and strengths, even as the people face barriers to using or developing them. And we know this by faith too, that the future we pursue together is a shared endeavor. The future God has promised is a future for us and our neighbors. And we will get there together, or we will not get there at all. Ending hunger means recognizing that responding to need is not a matter of merciful intervention, but of investing in a shared future, trusting that the work of God toward that end will be revealed in those very communities that the profit-driven economy so often leaves behind. If we are going to end hunger, we need to invest in one another by sharing resources, listening to each other, and building the relationships that will ensure justice in the world God has promised.
So our scriptural focus this evening is the story of the Exodus, which can be found, of course, in the book of Exodus as well as Numbers. But our focus verse for this evening comes to us from Psalm 107, the 19th verse. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and God saved them from their distress. So as Ryan points out here in this week's video, the Exodus begins in Egypt, where God's people were enslaved and oppressed, and God sought out a spiritual leader, Moses, to lead his people, to put Pharaoh then into his place and accompany those people across the wilderness for generations, providing for them food and water and safety, even when the going was tough and even when their relationship between God and God's people were complicated. So simply put, God was willing to make an investment here in this community. The covenant that he made between them left both parties vulnerable to the other. By God leading them out of Egypt and then entering into this covenant with them, God tied their two futures together. God, you see, had a plan and invested much to ensure that God's people were a part of that plan. The provisions that God granted were not simply merciful gifts, but they were rather a further investment towards a shared future between God and God's people that would eventually become then the nation of Israel. Of course, the church is not God. Yet, as spiritual descendants of those same wandering Hebrews, we are still dependent upon God's promise of a future. And perhaps there's even something that we can learn here about what it means to pursue a promise. So I would invite you this evening to first read the story in our study guide about the Beloved Community Incubator, which is located in Washington, D.C. And then respond to these following questions. Think about or share in your journal about a time when someone showed you kindness and mercy. What was that like, and how did that make you feel? Also think about or share in your journal about a time when someone used their time or their skills or talents to invest in your growth. And what was that like? And how did that make you feel? And now I'd like you to compare and contrast those two experiences. One of kindness and mercy and one of investment. How are they different? Which experience made more of a lasting impact on you, and why? And does our community take time to invest in long-term growth right here in our neighbors And if so, how? If not, then how might our community begin to make this investment in others? And what might that actually look like? Finally, where is there a need for the kind of investment that can end hunger here in our community? I'd like to close our evening's study with a prayer, and I invite you to join me. Covenant God, since ancient times you have led and fed your people through many wilderness journeys. In this time, give us strength to invest your gifts in our neighbors and our communities, that all might be fed. Amen. I'd like to again thank you for joining us this evening. I want to remind you that our final part of this Bible study will take place next week as we look at the topic of action. So please join us on Facebook or YouTube at 7 o'clock. Have a blessed Lenten time.